Russian President Vladimir Putin and his army are being humiliated in Ukraine. Last month, his army fled in the east as the Ukrainians counterattacked. This week, another rout of the Russians, this time in the south, after the Ukrainians first picked off bridges and military assets, cutting off reinforcements, and then staged a rapid advance that sent Russian soldiers again fleeing or surrendering. Now, Putin has ordered another 300,000 Russians into the army to replace his horrendous losses, but some are turning up near the front with almost no training, no food, and very few weapons. Here's a video made by some of them.
Никому не нужны, подготовки ровным счетом ноль.
Мы жрем то, что сами себе покупаем. Оружие покажи.
Ни одно оружие не вписано ни на одного человека.
Ни одно оружие не вписано ни на одного человека.
Joining me is General Jack Keane, a retired four-star general and former Vice Chief of Staff of the US Army. He's now chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. Jack Keane, it's always great to talk to you. How much trouble is the Russian army in?
Oh, they are in serious trouble. Certainly in Ukraine, what we have seen on display is poor leadership, poor training, incredibly low morale, much worse than what it was at the outset, certainly. And the units have turned into, as opposed to being cohesive, organized units, they're a bit of a rabble now, and that's evidently being displayed where people can see it for what it really is. And secondly, the so-called mobilization is not going well. There's a lot of resistance to it back in Russia, and they're forcibly conscripting young men to join the army when they were supposed to just call up the reserves, and that is also adding to resistance and frustrations. There's hundreds of thousands of young Russian males who have literally fled the country. And what obviously is on display here, and we got some insight to many of these potential new recruits that are coming, are physically and medically unfit, and certainly, Andrew, not psychologically and emotionally prepared to go to Ukraine and fight for Russia. They don't want any part of it. So even the added complement of new recruits, while certainly they can help as a labor force and do various chores when they get into Russia, they're not going to be an effective fighting force, and certainly they're joining a force that's already displayed its ineffectiveness. So our judgment at the Institute for the Study of War, despite the additional troops that will come into the Ukraine theater, it will not be decisive in helping the Russians to turn things around.
I even saw one clip of some of the recruits saying 90% of them were sick, and one even holding up a thermometer with his temperature, showing he had a fever. I mean, it's just so extraordinary. The fact even that they post these things tell you something about the morale. But how much longer then can Vladimir Putin and his army take the punishment? I mean, there must be the army leadership must be beside themselves, but also some people must be wondering this can't end until Putin goes.
Well, certainly Putin departing the scene would be an answer that everybody in the West would welcome. The pressure on him has got to be growing. You know, we don't have really good insights into his power base that's right around him, Andrew, that he works with on a regular basis, if there's any dissenters there whatsoever. But certainly there is a growing dissent among the population, not where I think he's at risk, because, you know, there's not large demonstrations or protests, but the frustration is certainly increasing. And now the mobilization of people are not from places away from Moscow and St. Petersburg, which they had been with the initial force. Now people in Moscow and St. Petersburg, closer to the influencers and the elites in both of those major cities, young men there are being forcibly conscripted. And that's not what was taking place in the past. And that is also going to raise the level of consternation among the people in Russia.
Now, Putin obviously knows all this stuff. He'd be getting very desperate. He has warned that he could use nuclear weapons. Well, how serious is that threat now that it's really on the line for him?
Well, you've got to take the threat serious because it's Putin. He's a thug and he's a killer. And certainly I'll take the Biden administration at face value that they have spoken to his leaders and told them there would be, quote, catastrophic consequences. And while they're not sharing with the American people or the world what those consequences are, they have stated that they have explained those consequences to the Russian leadership. In our view, when we interpret what that really means, the United States, if a nuclear weapon went off in Ukraine, we would not respond in kind with a nuclear weapon. I don't think we would respond with troops, but the United States and NATO would likely respond with devastating air and missile attack, which would literally destroy the remnants of the Russian military inside of Ukraine and actually guarantee that he loses the war. He would use a nuclear weapon to try to end the war, but actually it would result in his losing it. And certainly his military leaders understand that. I can't imagine that Putin wouldn't understand that himself.
Now, there's been one development that is good news for Putin, but bad news for us, for Americans, for people around the world. OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Producing Countries, and OPEC Plus, other countries that are not actually in OPEC but also produce oil, have agreed to restrict the supply of oil, which to drive up the price. This is obviously good news for Russia because that's an oil-producing country. It's bad news for the West because we're coming into a recession, of course, among many countries, and we don't need a further rise in oil prices. That's going to hurt. How did this go so wrong? Because Joe Biden went to Saudi Arabia 2 months ago begging for an increase in oil supplies. Saudi Arabia's effective leader, the Crown Prince, has said essentially, up yours, America. No way. I'm with Vlad.
Yeah, I mean, I think the words that you're choosing speak right at the heart of what's happened here. I mean, you're right. Our president went there with hat in hand. And listen, there's real tension between the United States and Saudi Arabia after President Biden came to power because of this Khashoggi affair, the killing of the journalist there, which the Trump administration certainly chastised the Saudis for as well. But I think President Biden took some extra steps in criticizing them and referring to them as a pariah. And then right after he took office, within the first couple of weeks, there was supposed to be military shipment of arms to Saudi Arabia and to the UAE, which both of those countries had purchased, and he shut it down. And did so because he didn't believe the behavior of the Saudis justified that. And I think this has been festering with the Saudis for some time. So, right, there's other issues operating here. Also, so our audience understands, OPEC usually operates in their own self-interest. And I think while there's some other issues here, certainly with the United States and also with the United States and the EU, just hours before the OPEC decision, they decided to put some price controls in effect to keep the prices of Russian exported oil down. And that may also have been a factor in this decision. But yeah, people are going to look at this and see it, that Russia's going to make money off of this deal, and Saudi Arabia certainly just cast aside the United States recommendation.
General Jack Keane, always informative talking to you. Thank you so much indeed.
Yeah, great talking to you, Andrew.